So how are we going, guys? Zizzler here. I was just watching some of the Pro League matches and things that have been happening lately, and I thought I'd make a quick little video to try and explain some of the nuances of Terran vs TvZ Mech and why it's going to continue to be a problem for the coming months, and why it's only going to get worse, and Zerg's going to lose a hell of a lot more. It's a life versus innovation. I mean, what a series, what a great game. But also the game on Terraform is the perfect example of all of the problems that Zergs are going to have moving forward in the Terran vs Zerg meta at the moment with Mech. Mech TvZ at the highest level right now is completely broken in Terran's favour. And it's leading to some horrifically boring games where the Terran player just sits still, turtling, and just gets a shit ton of turrets. So how did this happen? And more importantly, why did this happen? The Swarm Host nerf has had a massive knock-on effect in the matchup, which is leading to a boring turtley style where you go to BCs, which is exactly what innovation used to defeat Life. Now, Life is no pushover, and the people that say that he played it wrong are kidding themselves. And I'll explain later just why Life was once the pinnacle of anti-mech Zerg play. To understand TvZ Mech right now, we first have to understand how it used to be played, as well as some of the foundational principles behind the matchup. Now, Mech TvZ is a compositionally based matchup where the Zerg player actually controls the pace of the game. The only decisions that the Terran player actually makes is whether he goes bio or mech, what times he can counter attack, and when he can do his final push in the late game. All other decisions that are made are reactionary to what the Zerg player does. So compositions are very easy to understand, and it's pretty well just this, is that roaches are beaten by tanks, tanks are beaten by mutas, mutas are beaten by Thors, and Thors are once again beaten by roaches. And it works in a circular, and depending on who's got the better composition at that time can take the better engagement. So it all sounds pretty simple, right? Wrong. Because of the style of Zerg production and the way that Terran increments out units, the Terran has to know exactly what the Zerg's doing. So he's got a couple of ways to do that. One is to scout and scan everything, the other way is to try and force units, and then the final thing is just game sense. Just feel what you think the Zerg's going to do. So this is the inherent difficulty of playing Mech. And in a time where balance, the meta, and maps have all changed, Zerg players are going to take advantage of that and use timing attacks and tech switches that the Terran players just aren't ready for. And that's how they're going to get their wins. So this is the reason why that Bravo and Reality both lost their matches in Pro League. Is that one wasn't prepared for roaches and the other one wasn't prepared for ultras and broodlords. So from a Zerg player's perspective, I want you to consider this. So you can simplify that down into Zerg tech switches and their progression through the game. If a Zerg player goes Ling Muta, what is a Terran player's response to that? It's Hellion Thor. But what if we add more transitions to the game? How would that affect the way that the Terran player has to respond? So if we look at Sulky's opening of Roach into Muta, he then transitions into the mid game with Roach Hydra. Now, Terran player's response to that is to go tank, Thor, tank, before he can even think about getting to the late game. This means that the more transitions that a Zerg player forces the Terran to do, the harder it is for him to get to Ravens and BCs, and the more exposed he gets as he has to take further and further apart bases. So Zerg functions on tech switching, getting a compositional advantage, and then trading with their opponent. So what's the problem? Since the Swarm Host change, Zerg players cannot trade cost effectively enough, or more importantly, supply effectively enough with the Terran player. So how Swarm Host used to function was this, is that once you got to 12, you could hold the very, very scary 2-2 mech timing attack, and then you could go on the offense. So then if you moved your Swarm Host to an aggressive part of the map, and I'll use Overgrowth as an example here, you could secure your expansions while also pressuring the Terran and forcing him to put tanks there to defend. That ties up a massive amount of his supply and his gas in order to stay alive against that. That makes him weaker in other areas. You've essentially forced the Terran Mech player to split his army, and we know that Mech is strongest when it's together. Okay, so for part 2, the Zerg players have invested in swarm hosts that are going to trade and become more cost effective over time. This means that the Zerg player can get by on a lower drone count because he doesn't need the economy that he needs to trade the same way that he would if he was going pure Roach Hydra. By dropping to about 50 drones, the Zerg player can get a second Roach Hydra Viper army, and he can poke and snipe and yank and trade versus the Terran at his compromised bases, because the Terran's got a bunch of his supply teed up somewhere else trying to defend swarm hosts. So I want you to imagine just how many tanks you would have to build to defend an area this large that the Zerg player is also attacking into and taking trades. That is a lot of siege tanks, and it's even more gas. It's impossible to do this while also getting BCs and Ravens. You just do not have the gas that you need to do that. Sound unlikely? This is how life used to beat such no-name Terran scrub players such as Dream, Gumiho and ForGG with ease, and made them look silly when they tried to mech versus him. So yeah, for those 3 games that I'm talking about, I'll put the links in the description so that you can check them out. So why did no one play like this? And why did we get so many Raven and BC games? Because most people were dumb. They saw the concept of free long-range units that were very hard to attack into, and they thought that's all there was to the matchup. And so they just built a million of it. Now, the problem with that was that meant that the Terran had to go into Ravens and had to go into BCs to counter it. And it took a fucking long time. But you know what happened? The Terran players won every time that happened if they were a good Terran player. They had to throw really hard to lose those games. The Zerg players just sat with their swarm hosts in the middle of the map, surrounded them with spores and spines, and waited for the Terran to max out on Ravens and kill them. Now this is going to anger a lot of Zerg players. But mass Raven strategies were a response to mass swarm hosts. It wasn't because we went Ravens that you went swarm hosts, it was the other way around. So what's the state of TvZ Mech right now? Zerg players have to have a much larger economy, at least 70 drones, sometimes a hell of a lot more, because they need to get a massive amount of income to take trades versus the Terran player. That means they can't get 2 really scary armies, and they can't attack in multiple positions anywhere near as good. They can't split the Terran Mech player up, and if they did try to split their army up, that'd be suicide. So Innovation recognised all of these problems, and so what he's doing now is he's building a bunch of sensor towers and just using scans to know where the Zerg player is at all times. So he's always in position, you can never get him out of position, which means that you've got to attack into him when he has a much, much better position on the map. The Zerg player can't take trades in those situations, they just lose everything. And the other important thing that he does that nobody's picking up on is that he builds a shit ton of turrets. Now the turrets in the matchup do 3 things. He's turret pushing towards the Zerg player to funnel their units and their ultras into tight chokes. The other thing is that they stop Vipers from yanking and blinding clouding his units. And then the third and final thing is that they stop the mass corruptor floods that you used to see that could take out a bunch of BCs. So if you can't attack into him, you can't kill his battle cruisers, and you can't hold positions on the map. What do? You're forced to engage into him at some point because you have to try and eliminate his army, because his army is just going to keep moving forward and killing your stuff and taking your bases, and you'll starve out. And the other thing is that you're talking about trying to go into mass counterattacks. Terran buildings fly. And if you've got an unkillable army as a mech player, how the hell is the Zerg player supposed to kill the floating buildings above it? It's impossible, they can't be done. So after a few attacks from the Zerg have been defended, the Zerg simply doesn't have the bank that he needs to deal with BCs, and the game ends. So what's the fix? Well, the obvious change is just reverting the swarm host nerf. And sending things back to the way that they used to be, and having players like Life lead the way once more on how to deal with mech. And then hopefully the other Zergs pull their finger out of their ass and look at what he's doing and try to copy him and learn some of the things. Because the difference between this and the way that Life controls is that this is easy to understand and it's easy to replicate. We're not talking about trying to split against 15 Widow Mines, we're talking about where to hold a position on the map. And that's something that all Zergs of any level should be able to figure out. If you're still scared of swarm hosts, allow me to propose an alternative. What if we gave a passive buff to the Nidus, which increased the energy accumulation of units inside it and shortened the cooldown on abilities, so that Zerg players could put infestors, queens and swarm hosts into it, move around the map and be able to attack more often. Because Zerg really need something, because if they don't, as Terran players get better and better and better at reading what the Zerg player is doing and not losing to silly roach timings, Zerg players are going to hit a brick wall and they're going to get smashed when it comes to the pro level of StarCraft, unless something seriously drastic happens in the meta. So what this would do was this would create some sort of micromanagement of the swarm host, and would also offer up the ability for Terran counterplay versus them. Now if you think about this, this would be something that would be fairly micro intensive for the Zerg player to do. They would have to burrow their units, send the locusts off, pick the units back up, put them in the Nidus, before they could put them back out, burrow them and send the locusts again. Now this would also create windows of opportunity for the Terran player to exploit that, where if they manage to snipe, say, the Nidus, the Zerg player would instantly lose that position on the map, and the Terran player would be able to move forward and set up a better position. So this is a win-win on both sides. But the other thing that it would do would be this will allow the Zerg player to maneuver around the map a hell of a lot faster, and will stop the Terran player from just sitting still. The Terran player will be forced to hunt for these Niduses to slow down the Zerg's ability to put pressure on him in different areas. And I think that'd be interesting and pretty cool to watch. And everybody loves Nidus, don't they? Nidus are fucking awesome. Except when they're in your main base. Righto guys, well that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video and you hopefully leave here with a little bit more TvZ Mech knowledge than what you had before you came and watched me. Righto, so stuff completely unrelated. I'm still working on the TvP Mech series. I'm just not going to work on the ghost aspect of it right now. I'm going to work instead on the Stargate stuff. Truth be told, the reason is I'm just having massive amount of trouble getting reliable practice partners that know all of the builds that I need them to do to showcase the style at its best. So yeah, if you're a Diamond or a Masters Protoss on the NA server, just message me. My ID is Zizla at 797 is the character code, and yeah, hopefully we can get some games going, and I'll teach you some stuff as we go. Righto guys, so like the video if you like it, dislike it if you didn't, and leave a comment in the section below to give me some feedback. You could follow me on Twitch or Twitter at Zizla, and yeah, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more action. Hope you enjoyed it. Peace.